They say, what is R&B though? I say, it's your favorite show. It's that R&B podcast. Russ and Blake on the roll. We gonna share all our thoughts. Give you our perspective. It's our objective. We gonna get smart. It comes from the heart.
Welcome back to the R&B podcast with Russ and Blake. We are here with episode 19.
Oh yeah?
Flowing, moving, feeling blessed today. You know, we're recording on a Tuesday evening, so we usually point out we record at different times and our energy is always just in a different place. But today I've been feeling very blessed. I feel thankful, a lot of gratitude just for life today and being able to express my thoughts and learn more.
And it's summer break for you, right?
That is true.
Yeah.
One of the benefits of having a schedule that goes along with the school is that I get a lot of time off in the summer and I get to take some time to just get to my studies and reflect on, what I've done well and what I want to do better in the future. I mean, it helps me out a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. So hopefully everybody that's having a summer break is feeling blessed. And, we're going to keep our mind state high, like crime in the summertime. But we are really excited this evening because it's earlier in the evening. So I feel like I have more energy than our usual evening session. So we'll see what's popping in that dimension. But today, Russ found us a really cool article on psychology today.
Yeah.
And it really just, breaks down these 10 main pet peeves that really have been related to childhood stressors. And so we refer to them as pet peeves or things that just bother us. But obviously, there's a spectrum of how intense these emotions are towards these stressors or these pet peeves. And we're going to discuss how those things can be common and why we might not agree with all of them, but also what other ones we may add to this list.
Yep. And just like Blake said, this was found on Psychology Today. The article is titled 10 Pet Peeves That Reflect Childhood Trauma Wounds. And this is written by Katie Gillis, a licensed social worker. We'll put the references in the description of this video or audio, however you are consuming this today. And we might as well just get off to kind of the introduction, right? So she's trying to say that those who have experienced trauma have these triggers that follow certain themes that can mimic the behavior that or experience that they had in childhood. Okay. And I mean, a huge point of this is trying to say that there are structural differences that occur in the brain depending on the environment that a child is in. So that's why we have the behavioral and perceptions as we get older, so I think that they're really trying to make that emphasis at the beginning. And then like Blake said, we might not agree with all 10 of these points, but it's a very interesting springboard for a conversation for you to have with your family and listen to us talk about.
Yeah, and some of these, childhood events are significant depending on what stage of development a child's in. So, early in life when you're learning basic things, you may not remember certain traumatic events as you would when you're in a school age, when you start being able to conceptualize the world and actually have conversations and understand interactions between people. So with that being said, if you feel that you may relate to any of these things, just kind of a warning, you might feel triggered as we discuss these things, but it's also a good thing to really address these thoughts that you have and reflect on these experiences so that they don't manifest in an emotional response when one of these quote unquote pet peeves does come into play.
For sure. For sure. And one thing I've been noticing in my life is I'm trying to be as great of a communicator as I can be. And sometimes I will trip over what could seem like an unrealistic response to something, but I'm not perceiving how deep it is to the person I'm talking to. And I found myself in difficult situations dealing with this. And
yeah,
I'm internal locus of control. I'm trying to be as great as I can in these conversations.
That's a good point.
Right. So as I was looking at this, I'm like, okay, this is also helping me in a way be a better
More
communicator,
empathetic.
more empathetic, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
I've lacked in that, I really
Mm-hmm.
have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's all about perspective because
Hmm.
anything that you've experienced, you can't expect people decades later to understand those experiences and how they're going to manifest in your adulthood. So it's imperative for you yourself to understand them, and then also for you to make an effort to understand other people's backgrounds as well.
For sure. So the number one on this list of 10 here is a common occurrence. It says being cut off in traffic or a line can
Hmm.
trigger the wound of being pushed aside, like you do not matter or are not seen or valued.
Yeah, and this one I laughed at first because I was like, I think that makes anybody mad. But then after I had that thought, a few seconds later, I was like, well, I've definitely seen extreme road rage, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I think that that's the main identifier here of someone that may be able to relate to this situation of being pushed aside or not valued earlier in life. And that is obviously an experience that would cause someone to have intense anger in certain moments. So, yeah, I've been upset when I've been cut off before, but I'm not flipping people off, cursing out the window. I have had times where I wanted to do that, just be based off of the circumstance, caught me on a bad day, whatever. But the amount of road rage there is, people pulling out guns or pulling over to fight or even exchanging words, period. There's clearly a large amount of people that have these intense experiences as a result of these small little mishaps that may happen. And I mean, living in Phoenix, every single day there's something that could make you mad on the road just because of how crazy the roads are and how crazy people drive.
Mm-hmm.
So when I see people react extremely, it just makes me think like, do you do this every day?
For sure.
Because I know this isn't the only time that you're having this kind of situation happen.
For sure.
Um, so I don't know what you think about this one though, because still I'm not too sure about um, if that can be a direct correlation as frequent as I would expect
Mm.
just because of how prevalent I see people react that extremely. I know we all have different childhood experiences and we all react to them differently, right?
Yeah.
What's your thought on this one though?
Well, I automatically think about how people will define the fact that they get in road rage sometime as them being like strong. Like, oh, you're not going to do that to me. I
Right.
react this way because I don't take no BS and I'm a strong person.
Mm,
And just one thing this makes me think
mm,
about is how that's interesting, how we'll try to like put this almost like a cloak or a disguise on that could stem back to something like us not feeling valued in our early childhood experiences, but instead make it seem like we're tough now. When
mm-hmm,
really, I think this is just an indicator that shows any time you lose your cool, you're not being tough.
mm-hmm,
You know what I'm saying? And
mm-hmm.
any time you're able to like lose control of yourself, you probably have tripped on to some type of indicator that's showing that like this is a problem area
Yeah,
in your life, to be honest.
that makes sense. Yeah, I'm glad you put it that way because it becomes of a thing like I'm not gonna let anybody do this to me anymore. Like, no, that happened to me too much back then. Like, not anymore, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I guess I get that.
Yeah.
Cool.
Interesting one. And I'm excited to see what kind of feedback we get on that. Cause
Yeah, people are gonna be like, I get mad every day on the road.
for sure.
I mean, again, everyone wants to feel valued. No one wants to be ignored.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that that's going to trigger some sort of response from the average person.
For sure. And I think that there's many behaviors of like people who didn't feel valued early on in life that come out when they're adults. Because I feel like if you did get that support through your childhood years, usually you're not going to feel the need to get that from your adult peers. I
Mm.
mean, and I don't know if that's 100, but I think in my experiences with people, depending on their past, it's usually like they're a little more okay with you not liking who they are or not including them when they
Yeah.
have like the family unit that has
Yeah.
included them throughout history.
Have a little more confidence.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it could also play the other way. Like they're used to people accepting them and kind of elevating them for whatever it is they do or their character. And then if they're not receiving that same treatment, it might upset them,
Yeah,
just because it's like, hey, like I'm me, like everybody else treats me this way, so you should too, type of thing.
yeah, and that is true. It's interesting how that goes too, and that kind of leads us right into number two because this is another form of like being interrupted, but not necessarily on a road. Number two is saying that being interrupted in conversation can trigger the wound of being talked over by caregivers and treated like our words do not matter.
And this is another one, like, nobody wants to be interrupted when they're talking. Like, if I was deep in a thought right now and you just cut me off, it might make me feel a type of way. But I can also say that I'm sometimes the person that's interrupting. That's a problem that I have
Me too.
personally that I have to admit to, because sometimes having a conversation, I'll hear a small break and my mind's like, okay, they're done talking and I have an idea. So
Right.
that's something that my wife helps me work on. And it is not a favorable quality, but I do have to admit that I suffer from being on the opposite side of that. So being able to see this and kind of think of the people that I've maybe been the interrupter to. I'm a big reader of body language, and I think that being interrupted in a conversation, if you're aware of body language, you can really see if someone is truly bothered by that taking place, right?
Yes.
They kind of shut down, and then the conversation is almost abruptly stopped there, and the interrupter oftentimes doesn't understand the situation, like, oh, what happened? So I think a lot of people can use this one as a little bit of awareness just to develop more effective communication.
Definitely. And I think that's the value here too, is just the communication style. Because I do the same thing like you. Sometimes I'll jump in thinking my thought is going to be so brilliant. And I can definitely understand how someone can feel like, hey, you're not valuing the words I said. And now what this article is trying to make us think is that when the emotional response is something heightened to where they're like actually very upset because they just got interrupted, or it's like, you hate me because you keep interrupting me, or, you know, people will say, you always do this. You always interrupt me and never let me talk. That's when we have now like traveled into, I think, like toxic territory, because that means that you've been harboring that idea about me and my style. And I mean, in my experience of trying to be a great communicator, that's when I mean, you have to kind of reconcile and like have a conversation with someone really deep one-on-one to get your intentions straight.
After discussing that, though, I can think of a couple of times where I've seen someone get interrupted, and it's like the first time that it's occurred in this conversation, but they're automatically responding like so aggressively, like, don't cut me off, I'm not done talking. And that is a good reminder for me that getting interrupted is not that serious, because everyone immediately forgets that they're actually interrupted, and then they're just looking at you being explosive, right?
For sure. Yeah.
So
I mean, not only do we make this podcast, but I'm a huge consumer of podcasts. I love podcasts and interviews and whatnot. And I'll watch when people get in arguments on like a conversation that's being recorded, and there's only one line of audio that you can hear. So you'll hear people like, let me talk, like into their microphone. And that's always hilarious to me when I see that type of debate or argument.
that is interesting.
For sure. For sure. So number 3 leads us right into that. Number 3 says eating a meal with someone on their phone can trigger a wound of being ignored.
Yeah, that's a new age issue right there. So it's tough.
Sure.
It's tough. This one makes me be more aware. Just I have a baby and I have a lot of things to do on my phone regarding business, communicating with friends and family, and staying updated with the market and work related things. And you do have to be aware, cognizant of the fact that children are constantly observing, constantly learning everything in their surroundings. We take that for granted sometimes, and we think just when we're trying to educate them or trying to show them something, trying to expose them to something and control their focus, that's effective. But you can't control what your kid's looking at and what they're absorbing. So when they notice that your attention is on the phone all the time rather than on them, it can certainly make them feel neglected if it ends up being a repeated offense.
Yeah. And our attention is just so valuable. Like you're saying, when you're the adult around kids, like that attention is gold. There's no currency better than your attention to the young people around you. So I definitely feel what number 3 is saying, because, if you're young and you were experiencing a lack of attention from those adults around you, like you're going to be seeking it, because that's in an evolutionary sense, right? That's how we always learned how to navigate and stay alive. You had to look up to the bigger person and be like, okay, do you see me? Am I making the right moves? Am I doing what I need to do to thrive in this environment? Because you're supposed to know I don't,
And it's funny you say that, because I've noticed my daughter do things and then she'll look at me to see my response, right? And also, everybody likes to say time is money. Just think of supply and demand. So the older you get, the less valuable a minute might seem until you're closer to death. But when you're less than a year old, 1 minute is a very significant portion of the life that you've experienced. So every minute that's spent in a negative fashion, or that's spent being confused or not supported, whatever it may be, that's going to be significant in the development, of these children.
Yeah.
And so that's just something everybody should be aware of, because our perception of time is a lot different as time goes on.
Man, that's a really good point. Very interesting point. And this is another one that makes me hold a mirror up to myself, because I know for a fact when I'm hanging out with people and I'm trying to have like a conversation, because I'll be trying to, have that conversation one-on-one, and if someone just pulls out their phone and starts kind of typing and looking at other things, I feel myself being like, why didn't you just put that away until we're done talking? But I know it's the culture we live in, and it doesn't ever make me rise to a level of like I'm hating or like I'm super angry, but I do get, it's a pet peeve, and this is saying pet peeve, so like I don't know.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So do you think maybe that's a result of you being ignored or dismissed in your past?
Dude, I don't know if it aligns with me being ignored or dismissed in my past, or if I'm possibly just kind of narcissistic and I'm like, nah, pay attention to what I'm trying to say, because it's like very valuable. But I think us creating dialogue and uninterrupted dialogue is what's going to like bring out the best of our night or of our time that we're having together. So sometimes, I don't know, I'm just thinking like we have forever to look at our phone. Like, why are you looking at it when we're right here?
I mean, FOMO is a real thing, especially now and how fast things change. You think about just the pandemic, right? I feel like that's what really got me into a toxic relationship with my phone. Not only being closed off to things, but wanting to be updated daily on something specific. And then that's kind of the same time that I got into the stock market, financial market. That's changing every day too, every minute. So there's so much news and so much content and information and updating that you can do. Sometimes it is hard to disconnect between those, especially if it's something that you find significant in your life, such as a pandemic. And then once something like that is gone after 2 years of it being extremely relevant, instead of just stopping that habit, you may replace it with something else, right?
Yeah.
Just because with your RAS system, reticular activating system, when we do things repeatedly, they become a habit and a routine, and something that is within our subconscious, something that our body wants to do without us without us necessarily being aware of it. So that's something for you all to be aware of as well, because when you do things repeatedly, you may think that I'm only going to have this bad habit for a few days, or I'm only going to break my routine for X amount of time. But the longer that goes on, the harder it is for you to get back on track. So when you take breaks from being good to yourself, make them short ones, right?
That is a fantastic way to put that. And it makes me think, in the moments where I've experienced this, I never thought about the fact that this could just be a habitual behavior of the person that I'm with. I never think about the fact that they're just used to grabbing their phone, swiping, scrolling, loading. I'm taking it like personal. Personal. Like, you're not paying attention to me. That's a really good way to put that.
And that's the thing. A lot of times we interact with people and we're trying to communicate with them, but even that interaction isn't personal to some people, right? So if one side of it is personal and the other isn't, you are going to have that kind of butting of heads where someone does feel like they're being mistreated.
No, real. Very real. Okay, so number 4, moving right along. This one, I'm not quite sure if I understand. It says waiting. Waiting can trigger the wound of not knowing if needs will be met.
Yeah.
So, I mean, a little more information she puts here is few of us enjoy waiting, but the familiar feeling of having to wait often brings up inner triggers of waiting for caregivers who were distracted or otherwise unable to meet our needs in that moment.
Yeah. Well, so this one's hard for us to relate to because we had great parents.
Yeah, true. Very true.
So there are people who, they fix their meal and they eat, and then after they're done eating, they're like, "Oh wait, I gotta feed my kid too." Situations like that.
Sure.
I know someone who, this is a little girl. Her father is a single father, and had a situation where she got an infection, from what could have been seen as negligence, but really it was just unaware of how to properly prepare certain areas of your home so a small child is not at risk for certain things, right? And if those things continue and he's not able to learn from that and not able to develop these habits that parents should have to keep their child safe from these things, then as that child grows up, they may recognize this kind of cycle of their needs not being met or them not feeling safe, and
Yeah.
that would result in a situation like this where they may be triggered by waiting around for someone else to accomplish something for them that they know needs to be done.
True. I could see how that can be triggering when you put it that way because, if especially if you didn't have the result actually occur when you were younger and you were waiting, it's like, okay, I have to wait right now. And sometimes I might not even actually get what I'm waiting for. So as I get older, it's like someone told me to hold on a minute and I'm sitting there like antsy, like, well, am I even actually going to have my desire met?
Right.
Because historically, I'm used to being conditioned to it not being met.
Right. Yeah. And I guess I can relate to this one now that I think about it. Working in the hospital, we have a team environment. There's so much to do in such little time that you have to rely on people to complete some tasks for you. And me as a nurse, I have to delegate and ask people to do very specific things so that I can complete my job. And I've had situations where I've delegated a task and then it's not completed, either not in a timely manner or not at all. And then not only do I have to backtrack and complete that task myself, but then my trust with that individual is broken and it disrupts the care that I'm able to provide for my patient, which is very serious to me. So then moving forward, if I'm in a situation that kind of mirrors that, whether it's with the same individual or something else in that situation is similar to the previous that I did not have a favorable outcome, I might feel inclined to go ahead and take the initiative to do it myself because I might not have the trust that it's going to be completed. And that in turn is going to be an additional stressor because here I am taking on more responsibility. But it is almost a way of coping to just make sure that at least I know it's going to be done.
Yeah, I totally understand that because if the world was perfect, we could just rely on other people to like play their role in a perfect way. But but that's not how reality has been, and that I can see why is in the Psychology Today article because if your reality doesn't align with that, then you're going to develop these different ways to have to deal with it. I totally feel that.
And we've talked about trust before. And,
Yeah, true.
I think a lot of people that have trust issues, it can be correlated to something that happened in their childhood. And most of those individuals will admit to that.
Yeah.
So, us understanding how valuable trust is and what it takes to develop that type of rapport, it just can't be taken for granted when you do achieve someone's trust because it can easily be lost.
Definitely. And a lot of these things just remind me of like the work that I'll do in these schools. And I may have shared this on the podcast or not, but I've worked with, young girls who have been abused by men in their lives. And when I first meet them, I'm like, told like, hey, let them kind of work with more female staff for a little bit. Like you kind of warm up to them slowly because you're a big dude and they're young and have experienced this severe trauma
very recently.
Very recently.
Yeah.
So like you got to be very, delicate, and I am in those situations, but it's always super sad to me because it's like, I know who I am personally, but I got to think about their perspective of like what's been happening to them. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and that's not easy to do.
No. So that brings us to number 5 on the list, which says being put on the spot. Let me read that again. Being put on the spot can trigger the wound of being in trouble. which, I mean, in the kind of quick summary, it's like being in trouble or fearing negative consequences.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess they're trying to say being put on the spot is a common trigger for people, either by authoritarian parents or caregivers who display dysfunctional communication traits such as gaslighting or triangulation. Being put on the spot activates the part of the brain that remembers feeling stuck, worried that whatever we will say will get us in more trouble.
Mm. So you've probably maybe seen a live example of that in a school setting, right?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
definitely. Especially when it comes to having to take accountability for something that you've done
Mm-hmm.
that is obviously wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But I can see how if you're put on the spot, like, hey, it already happened, but the correct thing to do is to take accountability. But it's like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, what if for the last 11 years, if I took accountability, it meant physical pain
Right.
or trauma, like they're trying to say. So I could
Mm-hmm.
definitely see how somebody's like put on a spot and told to. Now, what I don't understand about this is, do you think this means even for a small thing? Like if somebody is in a group and they're like, hey, what do you think about the recent
I
something?
mean, possibly because that's what I was trying to figure out. Maybe it could stem, or I guess manifest into a type of social anxiety a little bit.
Hmm.
Make someone a little more reclusive or timid. This is definitely one that I can't relate to personally.
Mm-hmm.
Growing up, I was the type of person that liked being in the spotlight, and I also didn't get in trouble a lot at home. So I'm trying to like put myself in someone else's shoes and maybe relate to a couple situations that I've seen. But yeah, I agree. This one's interesting to me to kind of directly correlate those in that way.
Sure, and I'm going to go ahead and read this next paragraph because I think it does give us a little more context. It says researchers have found that childhood trauma alters brain activation patterns
Hmm.
involved in decision making. So therefore, they are likely to feel even more frustrated when they have to make a quick decision.
Oh, okay.
So I
Yeah.
guess it is just the physiological effect of the brain from the trauma, and then when you're put in a quick
Yeah.
decision making
Uh huh.
situation, it literally because of the alteration of the brain makes it difficult for you.
And it's probably simply enough just the decision of saying yes or no. Did you do this? Like,
Mm,
if someone's mad, like, did you do this? You just immediately say no and try
hmm.
to diffuse and shut off the situation. And
Sure.
I could definitely see how that would spill over into some more, I guess, normal interactions to where someone might feel like they have to respond a certain way when really the consequence for saying the other answer wouldn't be as severe as they may think, right?
Right, and we're trying to figure this out, with the listeners, and I'm trying to think how a normal social interaction could go with this phenomena. I don't know if it could be something along the lines if you ask somebody where they want to go or something like that, like, hey, where do you want to go eat? And the decision is just like crippling to
Mm.
them. I don't know if it can be
Oh.
taken in that type of context.
Hmm. Maybe. I would hope not.
Yeah,
That I mean, everything is probably to an extreme in some situation, right?
sure.
So, the average person, I would hope it wouldn't be that severe, but
Hmm.
there's definitely someone out there who just making any decision is probably going to make them extremely anxious.
Yeah, we have good feedback from our listeners. So if you understand how this correlates with,
And
feelings of trauma
we talked about decision making and how difficult that is already.
already, yeah.
So if you grew up not being able to be supported in the decisions that you made and you've always had to face a consequence for just deciding to say something,
Hmm.
then I could definitely see how that's going to hinder your ability to really function in a smooth manner later on in life, just trying to make simpler decisions.
Man, I'm
Yeah.
glad you said it that way. I've been experiencing this kind of recently, like the idea of it's hard for somebody to decide to say something. That is such a hindrance on our freedoms that we have if you don't
Mm.
feel like you can voice yourself.
Right,
And I
right,
know a
right,
lot of
right.
people in their groups feel like, hey, we're not allowed to voice ourselves. That's against the norm here. But your freedom comes with voicing your opinion and
Hmm.
voicing how you feel. That's a
Yeah.
fundamental principle of what freedom is. So,
And here in America, we have freedom of speech, but
mhm.
there definitely are consequences to saying certain things.
Mm.
There's consequences to saying a lot of things. I could name off 20 things right now that you either shouldn't say in a group of a certain demographic or in an airport, in a hospital. Like, the freedom of speech has to be within reason. And
Hmm.
that's what some people try to argue, which I'll never be able to understand because I definitely think there has to be limitations to the majority of our freedoms, because there are people that will abuse those things. There are people that have abused those things, and there are people that look forward to abusing freedoms, and unfortunately ruin it for everyone else that are going to be responsible. But it is a little bit of a safety measure, I believe.
For sure. And I think that that's necessary to have in society, like you're saying. True.
Yeah.
Number 6, one-uppers who constantly try to outdo others can dismiss achievements and concerns, triggering feelings of being dismissed in the past. So this is trying to talk about the person who, if you say, my day is great because of this, my day was great because one up. Or my kid accomplished this, and my kid accomplished this a few times. So when someone's constantly one upped, I guess that can trigger something from childhood trauma if they've experienced being dismissed.
And I was thinking about this one because that's definitely a pet peeve of mine, but I have to remind myself these are the kind of more dramatic reactions to these things. So it's definitely not something that would cause me to get overly upset. Do you think that you've witnessed this before?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've definitely witnessed it where...
Well, not the one upper, but like the response to it.
Oh, that's a good question. And I hope that I've never been the one who's one-upped people in their conversations.
I know I have.
Yeah. I probably have too.
And I think there have been a couple times where somebody's pointed it out to me, thankfully. And so nothing recent that I can think of, but that's definitely something that I didn't used to like be aware of at all. And I was always eager to share like, oh yeah, we all are successful, right? Like, oh, that's cool, but you want to hear about me?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's not a very polite way to acknowledge someone's success.
For sure. And as I get older and I'm trying to be a better human being, I'm definitely learning how to like give people their space to shine without any of my, input or my energy. Because it's necessary. Some moments are meant for different people. You'll have your 15 minutes of time for people to care about what you say, but when it's someone else's time, you have, in my opinion, you have to do everything you can to let them thrive. Let them experience that and feel the love and admiration that comes with a job well done.
And I truly enjoy celebrating other people. That makes me happy to have the opportunity, especially if I was able to help that person get to the point that they had something to celebrate about. But, if someone hasn't been celebrated in the past or they've always been overlooked, then I can see how it would be difficult for them to just allow someone else to bask in the glory for a little bit. And they may need to put in their 2 cents to feel included or not feel like they're insignificant,
Sure. And that makes me think number 6 could be flip-flopped. Like you could always feel the need to one-up people if your accomplishments were dismissed in the past.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying? So that could definitely go both ways.
Exactly.
I feel that. All right. Number 7, people who constantly, this is interesting, right? People who constantly talk about their diet can trigger the wounds of body shame. Many people who experience childhood family trauma also struggle with self-esteem and body image and may even use food to cope with negative feelings. So being around someone constantly talking about their body, what they dislike about it, and whatever new diet they're on can be draining.
Right. I can definitely say I've been this person too. I have a baby, so my wife was pregnant for 9 months, and then I was just living my guy life, going to the gym, and then talking about, oh, I've gained this weight, and oh, I need to do this so I can see my abs. And then I would say these things out loud, not acknowledging the fact that my wife's body's changing and she's growing a baby. And then so there was a point where I think she kind of helped me understand that, and then I was able to be more supportive of her and be more aware of some of the statements that I was making about myself with no bad intent or anything, but just being, I guess, selfish in how I was presenting my thoughts and what my priorities were in those moments, So this is definitely one that I'm sure is extremely common. I've seen a lot of couples where, visibly one person looks more fit than the other, or I've seen families where visibly maybe the majority of the family's obese and there's like one person that's not, and that can often cause resentment between people that are, interacting frequently. But may either live different lifestyles or live the same lifestyle, and then somebody may feel like it's unfair that they don't look like the other person, because I've heard that as well.
Yeah.
So body images is a big thing because I'm big on health. So when I see somebody that's obese, I want them to lose weight so that they can be healthy and be happy, because I think that there's a direct correlation between those two.
Mm-hmm.
But this is another also situation where we have to allow people to celebrate, and they have to allow people to set goals and voice themselves. But I guess you got to be aware of the people around you and how you're doing that.
Yeah, and this is a good one because just like you are, I've been insensitive to these things. I've never really, I mean, when I was younger, right, when we first met, when I was like 11, I would get made fun of, by my older brother. He would say that I was chubby, and his friends would always call me fat and whatnot because I was like a chubby kid. I was a chubby 10-year-old, 11-year-old, and I still have chubby habits if I don't discipline myself. I love just overindulging in desserts and sweets and whatnot, so I have to be very disciplined. So from the time on, I was like 11, 12, and I started working out. After that, I never really dealt with like body image issues. I was proud of the body I was building and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And it became difficult for me as I got older and I was dating or having relationships where I would meet people who had like very, difficult images of their body,
Mm-hmm.
possible body dysmorphia,
Mm-hmm.
or other things that are pretty common.
Yeah.
And I never really understood it. I was just like, hey, if you look fine. Like, what's going on here? So
you're like, I'm hanging out with you. I think you're cute.
100%. But I didn't really realize till I was older how normal that was.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say normal, but common, right?
Common, we could say, yeah, for sure.
And then for me, similar. When we met each other, we were both pretty chubby, and we were the same height. And now he's like half I'm gonna say half a foot taller than me. But after I started working out, I almost became a little compulsive. And then so it's something that I think about very often. And then I noticed changes in my body very easily. And then so it took me a while to realize that sometimes I am a little bit hyper focused on my appearance. Yes, I work out and I eat well because I want to be healthy too. But along with that, the aesthetic piece is something that's kind of always in the forefront of my mind. I think as a result of being, pre-diabetic as an 11-year-old and needing to make this dramatic lifestyle change for the sake of my health, but also wanting to look better and be attractive. So those things aren't necessarily bad, but you do have to be aware of them so you don't let them manifest in ways as of not being sensitive to someone else's appearance with themselves, right?
Yeah. And that's why I think this list is just good for us to springboard conversations, because it might not necessarily be tied to a childhood trauma. I don't know if we're necessarily relating it to that, but it does, kind of make sense.
Yeah, but like you said, getting kind of made fun of when you're younger. I can remember a significant number of years being significantly overweight that nobody said anything about it. And I didn't really understand that I was a lot bigger than the other kids around me. And then there was a point where a couple of my cousins would poke fun at me, and then it was like, boom, all of a sudden I was aware and a little more self-conscious, and my interactions with girls my age was a little more timid because I was more aware of the fact that, I was significantly bigger than my friends. I was 151 pounds when I was 11 years old. Wow. And I was told that I was pre-diabetic, and that was the same year that I moved to Arizona and I met Russ. I started wrestling, lost 15 pounds, grew 6 inches, and then I didn't let myself ever go back to that point.
Mm-hmm.
So luckily for me, health screening, extremely important. Check your hemoglobin A1C, stay away from the carbs. My PSA, we can move on.
Real. And one thing I just think is funny is because I remember when I was younger getting made fun of for my weight from my brother and his friends. I used to go to school and transfer that emotions into bullying other kids, right? And that was when I was at my prime bullying phase, when I knew that I had stuff wrong with me. So it was like, instead of me facing it, I would just go and try to bully.
And that's kids. How it usually happens.
How it usually
right?
happens.
Yeah.
Hurt people. We talk about this a lot.
And there's a big push to end bullying, but there also needs to be a push to, get these kids therapy and the assistance and the guidance that they need, because like I said, there's something else that's causing them to have these these maladaptive behaviors.
For sure. And if adults transfer pain on the norm, then you can't expect for a kid to deal with it in a healthy way.
Right.
Right. So number 8, being lied to can trigger the wound of being unable to trust.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that one
That
seems
one's pretty
straight up.
straightforward.
Yeah,
Yeah.
pretty straight up and down, because you could think, I mean, you lied to somebody, that's always bad.
Right.
It doesn't matter if they have a childhood trauma or not. Usually when you lie to somebody, it's going to make your relationship tainted.
Yeah. Now, what about the flip side when someone allows themselves to be lied to more than once and they still have this blind trust in an individual? Do you think that that could be a result of trauma?
I think so, because that could be you still wanting to just be accepted by somebody
Yeah.
who is not giving you reality or giving you reality. That's the best way I can say it.
The people that say, oh, when the times are good, they're so good, but when they're bad, they're so bad. It's like,
Yeah.
well, that's a big deal there, right?
Right, and that probably ties back into the self-worth, and I can understand
Yeah.
how a lot of this stuff from childhood does, because you're developing your self-worth and your self-image through these years. So if you feel like you're someone who deserves to be lied to, deserves to not be heard, and deserves to be dismissed,
Right.
you're going to be, practicing that.
Yeah, that's a good point, because it is definitely hard for somebody to break out of that mindset of being worthless or not being capable or valuable in their early years as they try to transition into adulthood and get a job and be competitive in this world. It's a very large disservice to not support children as they try to accomplish anything.
Yeah.
A lot of times parents might not agree with the goals that their kids have, and they have a different path in mind. But when a kid is passionate about something or they care about anything, if nobody else cares that they care, then they definitely feel that.
For sure. And this is why I think when we see people being courageous enough to face fears and to go out and try things, like, we need to support them, and we need to encourage them and cheer them on. Because it's not easy at all to be courageous. And then if we're adding in the aspect of they may have had some type of childhood traumas, I think you see this a lot in schools, right? When you see somebody like facing their fear and doing the play or public speaking in front of people, everyone kind of like cheers for him, like, great job, because you're facing something that takes a lot of courage. And we know that the person who's able to demonstrate the most courage in the face of fear ends up being the most successful,
Yeah.
in an environment. That's just how it goes. Right.
And that takes a lot of courage, because for whatever reason, I know when I was in high school, I thought that it was corny to be in like plays or choir or something. And when I got older, I was like, dang, I wish I tried being in the school choir, but it would have conflicted with sports. So I would have had to make a big decision there. But the main thing that was keeping me from doing it was that's not cool to do, especially as a football player. It's
I know.
like, why would I be singing?
Man, and now singing is like one of your
do it every day.
Yeah, for real. Like, you singing this person I know. So that's cool. That's
Funny
interesting.
how that works, huh?
All right. Moving right along to number 9 on this list, it says passive aggressive behavior can trigger a wound from behavior experienced in childhood. For those who grew up in homes with caregivers who behaved in a passive aggressive way, experiencing the same in adulthood can take people back to that feeling when they were small and unable to express their discomfort in their environment. It's interesting, this similar theme of not being able to express yourself.
Yeah.
Feeling like you can't articulate the words that are coming up in your soul is like a fundamental way that people are diminishing your freedom. And
being
it creates,
able to let out the thoughts that are building up in your head. Right?
Yeah, man. And that's it's so interesting. I mean, you look at throughout history, so many civilizations have made it a point to express themselves.
Yeah.
Hieroglyphics and monuments and all these different things, they're expressing themselves. And when us as an individual human being don't get the chance to do that, we have maladaptive ways in our environment.
Yeah.
It's very interesting how important that is.
It like hurts the soul not to be able to do that. That's just a innate behavior, being able to develop these thoughts, develop these emotions, and find a way to put them out into the ether, right?
Yeah.
I think I relate to this one. It's wonderful and just amazing as my mother is, this is something that she admits to doing or has in the past, being passive aggressive. And, I think early in my relationship with my wife, she had times where she was a little passive aggressive because she didn't want to confront certain things, like we discussed when she was on the show.
Mhm.
And then so that was something that really made me upset trying to deal with those situations because I could feel that tension and I wanted to just talk about it and get it over with because it would make me kind of anxious. But then as Maddie was discussing, she needed kind of time to process it herself. And so that was a little bit of a stressor between us because in my mind it was like, oh, if this doesn't get dealt with, then it's the end of the world. Like
Mhm.
I don't know what she's thinking. Like, what if she leaves me over this type? And then I would really just start racing through my mind. And so we really had to spend some time with each other and actually discuss this with each other as we recognized it. And I can say that today it's definitely not an issue at all. But I would just invite people to be aware of little communication cues like that. If it's something that happens and it makes you upset, or something that your partner does more than once and you think that it can be improved with a simple discussion, then don't be afraid of addressing it. Because I think one of the other points we mentioned might be kind of a result of being afraid to just speak about things. And if you're going to be in a relationship with someone, you need to be able to um, develop those communication skills over time and be understanding of each other not being perfect in your current communication level.
Yeah, man. That's a really good way to put that. And I've experienced this because I kind of identify with being a chill person. I
Mm,
identify with like being able to have higher emotional moments and I stay calm. But when it's me and another person and my behavior is what was the problem, it doesn't really help for me to just be like, oh, I'm chill and calm. It's like, no, I need to be a communicator and I need to listen. And I've found myself in all
mm-hmm.
types of like not bad situations, but just poorly communicated situations because
Yeah.
of that,
Yeah.
you know?
You're dismissing it, saying it's not a big deal.
And that's where
When
I might be
really,
being passive aggressive because I know it's a big deal, but I also am like, I'm chill, you
mm-hmm.
know? So that's
Right.
really just me being passive aggressive,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Or
Because,
someone not being aware that they're being passive aggressive and,
hmm
they're normally chill, but something really did bother them and they're like, no, I don't want to make a big deal about it. But it's like, no, you kind of are. So,
you are. And that's where I've messed up because it's like you're still making a big deal out of it by like dismissing yourself right now,
mm-hmm.
right? Because the
Mm-hmm.
other person's emotions matter, you know? So,
Yeah.
and I've done that so much. Like, it's just something I need to be better with, you
Hmm.
know?
Yeah, and
It's
that's why
something
this
I
is
need to be
good
better
for us
with.
to go through these because both of us, when we first read it, we read all these and we're like, oh, those are a little bit silly. But it's like as you sit there and kind of think about it, it's like, okay, that makes sense. Especially as we talked about on the spectrum, and certain responses can be a lot more severe than others. I think a lot of these are really relatable, and
Hmm
I've kind of mentioned before that in relation to the vast majority of the world, me and Russ had fantastic childhoods. We had to deal with our own difficulties, and everyone's life is very unique, right? But we are so blessed, and to be able to look at these things and us be able to relate, we can definitely assume that a lot of people are certainly able to relate to these a lot stronger than we are.
hmm
And so for us to be able to break them down and kind of add some perspective from what we've experienced, I hope that other people are able to do the same for themselves.
For sure. And I think it's very easy for people to dismiss others as being crazy. Like, oh, I did that and she's crazy or he's crazy now because of the way he responded, not
Mm,
recognizing that it could be not crazy, but experiences from
yeah.
the past that you're
Mm-hmm.
now triggering because of your lack of empathy or your lack of studying on how to communicate
Mm-hmm.
in a broader sense.
I'm glad you said that
Hmm
because I've seen people react in ways that were completely unacceptable. And then, depending on the context, or I may know them, may not know them, at times, if you've thought about these type of things, you can immediately understand why that person reacted that way, even though you know it's not acceptable.
hmm
But then it puts you in a situation, at least you're not going to add fuel to the fire. You have an opportunity to either diffuse the situation or remove yourself from it, or at least prevent it from escalating any further.
For sure. And leading us into number 10, I feel like this is an easy one. Being teased can trigger the wound of having boundaries violated. Well, that might have got more deep than I expected it to. at first. So, okay, I was saying being teased can trigger the wound of having boundaries violated. Teasing is a common
Mm.
display of affection for people in social groups. However, someone who has made fun of or ridiculed in childhood might be more sensitive to teasing than others who didn't have the experience.
Mm-hmm.
And that's interesting, because recently I was talking to a young boy who came to our school, and he was telling me about how like him and his group of friends got in a fight and he got in trouble. And I'm
Mm.
talking to him about how did this fight start? And he's like, oh man, well, we were having a roast battle and one kid said something too far and the dude punched him in his face, so then we all had to beat him up. And I was just sitting there like, bro, are you serious? Like, that's not a roast battle if somebody got mad enough to punch someone in the face. But but it makes me think of this because you never know. You could be just sitting there kind of, we roast for sport when we're young, right? It's a common thing. The
Yeah.
dozens, we roast for sport. But if you say
Yeah.
something and someone has a deep connection to what you just made fun of, like they might want to beat you up and you might find yourself in a difficult situation.
Yeah. That's fine. I'm over here trying not to
Bro,
laugh.
I know I was too because I was like, wait, what?
Well, but then I can think of so many situations us growing up because that was a thing, right? And it's all fun and games till somebody says that one thing that cuts a little too deep,
Yeah.
and then your feelings get hurt and it takes the fun away. But I don't know why that's like a sport
Hmm.
amongst young boys.
Well, I think that when we take the reverse of this, I think it does show a sign of your healing process and your maturity when you're able to take as much teasing as
Yeah,
that can come to you. So I think that was kind of a way of
right.
us like sharpening up each
Oh,
other for the
definitely.
world,
Yeah, yeah.
because that it is. It's a sign of how much you've healed if people are kind of able to poke fun at your
Hmm.
appearance and how you
Yeah.
talk and all this stuff.
It would be a certain person. You're like, oh, they don't need to be roasting each other because you know that what they're about to say is a little more serious than a little joke.
Yeah.
So, um, yeah, but I agree with you. It was kind of setting us up for success later in life, not caring so much what other people think of you, developing that self confidence and being able to kind of laugh at things when you know somebody says something ridiculous towards you, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because I've seen people say things that's like, okay, like that's so absurd. Like you can't even really be upset because it's just dumb. But then the person takes it so seriously, like that was an educated statement.
Yeah.
You have to be above the other person sometimes when they're trying to get under your skin.
Man, so true. That's so true. And I kind of like how they sum or leave this article with this last paragraph that says learning about these trauma wounds is less about placing blame and more about just understanding because parenting is a hard job for anyone, let alone someone without the emotional tools to handle the job.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a
Yes.
great way to put that.
Yes, you can read that 50 times
Mm-hmm.
because goodness gracious, is it true?
For
Being a
sure.
parent's hard, but being a parent is so, so important because if you do an awful job, then your kid will have these traumatic experiences and not be able to cope and interact properly. But the good thing is, if you put in the effort, most likely you're going to be an okay parent. There's no perfect way to do it. And we all know that it's difficult.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to cut each other some slack, but there are definitely some tools of awareness and tools of communication and diffusion that we can all use to at least put ourselves in a good situation to support our youth so that they will one day be a blessing to those around them, right?
Yeah. And the same holds true where you can do your best to just be a great communicator with people in all walks of life, whatever it is that you're doing, whatever environment you're in, you can maintain control of yourself by studying a little bit and doing some research on the possible triggers of people around you, whether they're rational or not. You don't need to understand it, but
Mm-hmm.
you are responsible for doing everything you can to make sure a situation doesn't become out of control.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because if you don't, then you might end up being the one that has to face the consequence.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. So that is the end of the article. I will put the references from the article and the article itself in the bio, the description, however you consume this, whether it's on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever else you might be listening from.
Worldwide, you can find us wherever you please, any corner, any shadow. Shine a light. Psychology Today is a very abundant resource, and there's a lot of articles on there that are very interesting to Russ and I. So if you all like this, let us know. We might do a couple of these again sometime soon. But the next episode will be going back to our guest series. So stay tuned because we're going to switch it up on y'all. Keep it flavorful, and just like last week, we'll see you next week.
Peace.
Peace.